Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whatever the case may be. I'm Mike. Welcome back to Fantasy Wargaming. Today's topic is all about feeling fresh after five. And what that means is going through a 5 round tournament and still feeling capable of making high level complex decisions without dissolving into a puddle of sweat. This has been a topic on Twitter recently about people sharing their experiences in terms of how they get on after the first 3 rounds of a tournament, because fatigue is a real problem and it does cause a player to become less effective as the tournament goes on unless they take measures to stop it. So that leads us to what a tournament actually is. It's a marathon because we play individual games of Warhammer and they take 2 hours to 3 hours, depending on how close the game gets. But it's not just the game. I mean, you show up to an event and you are meeting new people, you are catching up with people that you haven't seen for months. That's going to take time to chat with them, and that takes social energy. And for extroverts or introverts alike, that is going to wear on you. There's also, the travel considerations. What I mean by that is you have to get to the venue. You have to park up if you've brought a car. You need to get all your gear in. You need to sign in for the weekend. You need to worry about how you're going to get back to the hotel or back to where you are staying, and other considerations. There's a disruption to diet because you have your routine that you have on a daily basis, I'm sure, where you have, breakfast at a certain time. You have a fairly well-worn palate, shall we say. You'll go to your fridge, you'll get what you need, and so on. Or if you're working, there's particular places that you go to, or you have a packed lunch. A lot of that goes out the window when you go to a tournament because suddenly you're changing what you put into your body. And then finally, we have the fact that, yes, we have 5 2.5 hour long games, and that adds up, especially when we consider how involved just a single game of Warhammer is. So how do we make sure that our battery doesn't run out? Well, the first part of this is that we take control of what we can control, because there are so many chaotic elements to the weekend. We shouldn't make things harder on ourselves unnecessarily. So you should leave plenty of time for travel. If you're driving, find out ahead of time what the parking situation is like. Find out if there are quiet car parks nearby, whether you're going to need, coins, because some car parks, they might not even accept, credit cards, debit cards, contactless payment. Ask the TO for recommended spots is generally the best point of call here, because if you don't stress about parking up on the Saturday morning, you've already won. You've already won step one, which is get there with plenty of time and get there calm. Bring your own source water. This just means that you can keep yourself hydrated. A lot of people will buy drinks from the venue, which is perfectly understandable, perfectly fine. Especially sugary drinks can help in that regard. But there's no substitute for just bringing several liters of water and just making sure that you have drank that during the day, because that will just help your body so much. Consider bringing some kind of slow release energy foods. That can be in the form of nuts. It could be in the form of oats. So I personally, I favor flapjacks for that, because they give you a nice initial hit of energy but also give you slow releasing carbs over the course of the day, and that can help keep your energy levels up. Sit your ass down when you can. Most venues will have chairs, and you should try and take advantage of sitting down and resting your feet. Me personally, I used to get into the really bad habit of standing up for all 5 games, and by the end of day 1, my back is killing me. By the end of day 2, I am a mess. Now, I am not a incredibly physically fit person. I wouldn't even describe myself as a physically fit person, but that means that we should take advantage of small rest opportunities while we have them. And if you are physically fit, congratulations. If you're very athletic, great. But you're still going to feel it on your body over the course of a weekend. So when it's your opponent's turn, when they're in the tank, just sit down in a chair and just kind of observe. Don't stand up because you're not really missing anything. Your opponent will be announcing their intentions, and I think it's just something that we forget to do. And also get some sleep. What does that mean? You would think that that's fairly obvious, right? Well, make sure that you're not painting the night before. Give yourself an opportunity to be prepared, have everything packed away, ready to go for the morning, and go to bed early. And on the Saturday night, maybe don't go out drinking until the bar closes. Like, I know several people, and I don't need to name them, they'll be aware of who they are, will wake up on Sunday morning with a hangover, and they will not play their best games of Age of Sigmar on the Sunday because they will be feeling rough as pig shit. So, if you go in there just to be social, if you've gone 1-2, you've got no expectations of podiuming, and you're here for the social aspects, yeah, you can disregard this. But let's say you've gone 3-0, and it's your first 3-0 in a while, and you think, hey, this army's quite good, I feel quite confident in it, maybe I can podium with this. Perhaps you should stop yourself short when your friend asks you if you want one more drink and just think, hey, maybe if I go back to my hotel, put my head down, maybe spend 20-30 minutes looking at my opponent's list around 4, and then just go to sleep. Make sure that you are well rested. And now that we've talked about the periphery and the things that we can control outside of the game, let's talk about the games themselves. And it's important to note that these are not going to be cardinal rules, and more experienced players will ignore them where applicable, and I recommend that they do so because these are guidelines. They're suggestions. They're not meant to be something that we follow rigidly. So let's talk about time and the need to not waste it. Most tournaments will be having 2.5-hour rounds, and the amount of times that I myself, as well as people that I go to tournaments with, end up going to time is unreal. And I'm getting better at it, and my friends are getting better at it, but it's still something that we should try and minimize where possible. The benefits of making sure that we have plenty of time is we can afford to take toilet breaks during the game and not have it impact how much time we have left. We can go outside and get some fresh air between rounds because we have the opportunity to do so. We're not literally panicked, putting all our things back on a tray or in a storage solution ready to go to the next table. And it gives us a chance to decompress, talk with our opponent after the game about how the game went, and just kind of relax a little bit, give ourselves some rest, take a seat, like I mentioned earlier, and reset. And then the problems with not having enough, and this is a scenario that I guarantee that most of you will have experienced in your tournament career at least once. And if you haven't yet gone to a tournament, this is something that you will, I guarantee you will face. You look at the clock during your turn and you go, oh shit, there's only 30 minutes left and we've not even finished round 2. This means that one of two things happens. Either you try and talk out of your opponent, in which case you deny yourself the opportunity to come back from a game that you could win if the current board state favours them. Or you try and play quickly. Rushing leads to bad decisions because we've not had an opportunity to think about those high-level decisions. Bad decisions lead to easy mistakes, be it we place something in the wrong location, we forget about a battle tactic that we chose for the turn. Maybe we simply forgot that we don't have access to this spell that's the linchpin of our plan anymore because the wizard who casts it is dead. And then those mistakes cost us games. And if our intention is to get better at the game and to make sure that we're still playing our A game on round 4 and round 5, we need to make sure that we make time saves where possible. So what kind of time saves can we make? Well, the first thing that we can do is we can think honestly and critically about our army selection, because there are many, many armies in Age of Sigmar, and some of them are more straightforward than others, and some of them will create an additional layer of mental load, which is fine for individual games, but can overtax us over the period of a weekend. Playing into that, ensure you know the army's rules. If we spend less time looking stuff up, we have less time spent checking war scrolls, doing this pointless busy work, which adds up over the course of a game, especially if you're playing with 10 to 12 war scrolls that are different, and it's like, what are my hit and wound profiles? What's my save characteristic? What's my movement characteristic? What's my bravery? All of these things add up. And if you have a complex army that you're not familiar with, you're going to be spending half the game either looking up in your app or in your battle tome if you have it, and that is just no bueno. Army complexity does not equal army potency. It's a general rule, and there are exceptions. But the more complicated an army is, the harder it will be to play your A game. And I'll give an example of this on the next slide, so we'll revisit that point. But just keep that in your head. Just because an army has 500 rules does not mean that all 500 of those rules are going to win you the game. Sometimes a linear game plan that's straightforward can lead to less time in decision paralysis and more time to think about high-level decisions. And playing into that is, ask yourself, is there a good linear flow to the army-based decisions? What I mean by that is, there are some armies where you'll have many options about what you can do on a given turn. And there are other armies, and you could construct your list this way, where you have a game plan in mind before you even get to the table. You know exactly what spells synergize well with the strategy that you're doing. You don't have the burden of options, and the burden of options leads to decision paralysis. And this last point is probably the most fuzzy of them, because I think this is going to be something that you're really going to have an understanding of yourself with your own chosen army. But it's something to keep in mind, is sometimes reducing the number of options you have can help keep you fresh and help save you time. So talking about complexity, let's use the Lumineth Realm Lords as an example. The more decisions that we have to make, the more we use up our mental reserves. So Lumineth Realm Lords have like 500 pages of rules and options. And Teclis is a fantastic example of this, because he knows all 3 spell laws in the book, as well as having 2 War Scroll spells himself. You have 20 different options for even looking at, like, Arcane Bolt, Mystic Shield. This versatility is a blessing, but it's also a curse, because it leads to decision paralysis, indecision paralysis, however you want to describe it. If I have 4 not ideal solutions to a problem, I'm going to be spending time weighing up the pros and cons of each of those 4. If I have 1 imperfect solution to a problem, I don't even have to think about the decision. It's just made for me. So this versatility is fantastic, and very, very experienced players who have all of this stuff memorized and have many, many reps under their belt with the chosen army can know how to make those decisions relatively quickly. But if you are new to the game, or if you're just getting on the competitive tournament scene, or if you've just swapped to the army, these decisions add up, and they will lead to you losing time, and they will lead to you having to crunch and go very quickly at the end, and all of that will heavily burden our mental reserves. I'm going to talk about my own personal experience here, because 2nd edition Nighthorn and 3rd edition Nighthorn, I would suppose, are good examples of this. It's a complex army with a lot of movement-based decisions, and I was constructing my list in such a way that I tried to make sure that I had several different answers to a given problem. And the more complicated your army is, the more special rules you have to remember, the more of these decisions that you have to make, the more it adds up. And what I consistently found was that if I played a more complex and reactive army rather than a proactive army, by the time it got to day 2, I was making more and more mistakes because I was just tired out. I was worn out. And when I swapped over to something more straightforward like Cruel Boys, the army itself was weaker, but I found myself playing more freely. And when I swapped to Big War, yes, they have a lot of decisions and a lot of complexity, but I spent so much time practicing the army before I ever brought them to a tournament that by the time I got there, those decisions became automatic. Oftentimes, the most successful long-term armies are those with proactive, straightforward game plans. A good example of this in recent memory would be Nurgle with their like heavy fly builds. Or you could look at, say, Idoneth Deepkin, which is very much a play for round 3, harass you in the first few turns sort of army that actually didn't have that many rules to worry about. It was just, I know what I'm doing. I'm going to vary up slightly, but I'm not caught in this indecision paralysis. But there are exceptions, like Thunder Lizards, one of the top armies for a long time, probably still top right now. They have a shitload of overlapping rules interactions. But the people who are playing those armies and having success are very experienced players who know that they're the top army, have spent the time learning them. And this is why you still get high complexity armies that end up going to top tables, and then you pilot them and you go 2-3, 1-4, and you go, what just happened? And it's like it's this sort of thing. So I want to quickly talk about AOS reminders. If you're not aware of it, I would advise you to go check it out. Just Google Age of Sigmar reminders. Fantastic utility when learning an army or learning the game. Basically, what it does is it gives you a printout of phase by phase and even sub-phase by sub-phase what your options are based off of the army that you give it. You input your War Scroll Builder list and it tells you what your rules are and in what order that they would be relevant. And it's a great tool for learning the army, but it's not a great tool for tournament play. The aim when going to a tournament is to have confidence in your army so that you don't waste time. And your opponent will notice if you're looking at a printout from AOS reminders and go, hey, this guy's unfamiliar. I feel more confident as a result. Just because you're not checking your battle tome, it doesn't mean that you're not still checking rules and you're looking away from the current board state. You've taken your eyes and your mind off of what's happening in the game and you're looking at a sheet of paper to go, okay, have I made sure that, I've not missed anything? This requires energy and time, and often the things that you're double checking for, you're right about anyway. Sometimes the correct play is to just assume that you've done everything and just move on. And if you've forgotten something, fine. But the last thing that you should be doing at a tournament is making yourself second guess every phase that you're doing because you're checking a stupid sheet of paper. Make sure that you practice ahead of time. Just learn the army, shed those training wheels, because that's what they are. They're slowing us down because they're basically stabilizers on a bike. If we've got mastery over our rules for our army, we don't need them. Tokens. So this one was one that came up on Twitter that I thought was a fantastic one that I had overlooked, which is I talked about taking our mind off of the current board state. So then how do we make sure that we're keeping on top of our rules interactions while still keeping our mind on the game? And the answer is tokens. Some War Scroll, you buy the official War Scrolls and they'll come with little tokens themselves. But you can also buy other pre-made ones by third-party retailers. Like Pro Painted Studios do a good set of acrylic ones that I use for Nighthaunt and my big war armies. Or you can just make your own. Grab some poker chips or some MDF discs that you can buy in bulk off of Amazon. Put some sticky labels down on them or use a permanent marker. And just write down common buffs or debuffs that your army is capable of. So if I were to talk about Big War, I would go, okay, Violent Fury, +1 damage. And I'd make a couple of those tokens, one for each of my War Chanters. And then at the beginning of my turn, I have my tokens in front of me that tell me all of the possible buffs I can hand out. If they're successful, I put the token that represents the buff or debuff next to the affected unit, and then it's one less thing that's on my little pile of chips in front of me, and I can move on to the next one. And any that are unsuccessful, I just put to one side so that I know that I've already gone through that process. Similarly, if you've got a lot of spells to choose from, so for example, tech list, we talked about him earlier, knowing like 20 war scroll spells, sorry, 2 war scroll spells, 18 spell lore spells. Staples or other printing places, they do like card printing services. Get your rules written down on a load of little cards, get them printed off, and then you've got like a little hand of cards that you can cycle through when you're making a decision. And when you choose to cast a spell, you can go, right, I put down this card, this is the spell that I've just cast, and if it's affecting a certain unit, much like we have done with those poker chips or MDF discs or acrylic markers, we put it next to the unit that it's affecting. And it's just a great little way to make sure that the rules are on the board rather than away from the board, away from the decisions, and tucked away in a sheet of paper or a book, or God forbid, the Age of Sigmar app, which is fantastic for making lists, and it's fantastic for referencing stuff that you do not have yourself in front of you. But if you're checking your own rules on the app, I find that that is no good. So I've got a few more final thoughts here to touch on. The first of which is about automation. And what I mean by automation is, let's try and make everything that's linear that we know is consistent from turn to turn automatic. If the sequencing of your spells is important, or the sequencing of your decisions is important, why not consider making a little laminate shopping list with tick boxes? Bring a dry white marker and just tick them off as you do them. And this is super important if you've got stuff that happens at the beginning of hero phase, middle of hero phase, end of hero phase, or beginning of combat, end of combat. And yes, this might seem a bit contradictory when I was downplaying AOS reminders earlier, but my point here is AOS reminders it controls everything that you're doing for the entire turn. It talks about things that you can do in the shooting phase, it talks about things you can do in the movement phase, and oftentimes the actual complex bits that you need to remember are confined to one phase, and you could just have a little tiny playing card checklist that you have on the table. It's not so big that it's disrupting what you're doing, and you can just tick through. Once you get to the end of the turn, wipe it off. Real nice time saver. And the last point I have to make here myself is make sure that you use your opponent's turn productively. Don't just stand there and watch them move their individual models. Think about how that impacts your next turn. And again, this may seem counterproductive when I've said earlier about making sure that you take time to relax and take strain off of yourself. But our aim here is to make sure that we take our turns efficiently and quickly so we're not wasting our time. And that way, we're not thinking about... The last thing you want to do is be given priority, take your turn, and go, wait, what do I need to do? You should already have a good sense of what your battle tactic is going to be, what your movement phase is going to look like in order to facilitate that battle tactic, and have that mentally checked away so that you can focus on being reactive during your opponent's turn. And when it comes time to do your turn, it's just boom. A, B, C, done, hand it back over. Put the pressure on your opponent. If you are playing quickly and confidently, it will cover up from any mistakes that you may make because your opponent won't stop. Like, the last thing you want to do is go spend 10 minutes in the tank going, what's my battle tactic going to be? And then pick it and then move something in such a way as to make that battle tactic different. And then go, oh shit, I've just given you an opportunity to redeploy. Don't just tell your opponent this stuff. Like, decisions like this, you want to be confident. Because sometimes if you make a decision and it turns out to be a mistake, if you've played it confidently and quickly, your opponent won't even pick up on it because you will pick so much from your opponent's body language. And if you're taking the time during your opponent's turn to think about what you're going to do and just observe what they're doing, rather than just chatting shit or scrolling on your phone or going to the bar and getting a drink. You can see the mistakes that they're making and capitalize on them. And you can be confident in your turn, you can play your turn quickly, and you don't end up going to time. And that's going to be our last point for the day. I want to thank you for watching, and I want to open up the floor to viewers now, because I've got no doubt that I've missed some tips and tricks here. So I would invite you to share them either in the comments below on the YouTube video, reach out to me on Twitter at LRUK or at FarmWarGaming, and I will endeavor to share these tips when and where I can. It might end up being another compilation video if there's enough to warrant it. Otherwise, it will just be likely on my social channels. You can find my writing for AOS on goonhammer.com. I would recommend you go check it out if you haven't already. And if you have enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and following so that you can be notified when more AOS content is coming your way. And that's it. So thanks for watching. See you next time.